Hey guys, welcome back to JD Mods. This is a different video to our normal JDM modified car stuff. So if you like that, don't worry, that's still what we're doing. This is just a little how-to video for people with a Toyota Prius. So this is a 2012 Toyota Prius V, and like all of the motors of this generation, this is the third generation motor. The head gasket has gone bad, so the coolant leaks into the first cylinder and causes a bad misfire. So today what we're going to be doing is removing the third generation engine and replacing it with this fourth generation engine over here that we bought. This is out of a 2016 Toyota Prius Prime. It is the same 2ZRFXE, something like that. And so we're going to be putting this motor into the Prius V that you just saw. And so we'll kind of go over the top level tips and tricks and if we're able to make it work. So first things first, we're going to remove the old motor, and we're doing this based on the instructions of a form that we will link down in the description below. The transmission will stay in the car. We only have to remove the one wheel, the bumper, and a bunch of stuff. Then we'll lift out the old motor, and then we'll go into more detail on the differences between the third gen and the fourth gen motors.
The engine is now out. If you follow the instructions that we're going to link down below, you shouldn't have any problems. Kyle's just going to pan over here to what we took out.
So, in order to remove the motor, we had to first remove, this is all in the instructions as well, but we removed the cowling and the windshield wiper kind of assembly arms. You have to remove the intake and throttle body to make enough room to pull the motor forwards. The water pump has to come off so that you can separate the engine from the transmission. This is the right-hand side mount that has to come off, of course. That's just the only engine mount you have to remove. Of course, the airbox came off, and that's just the valve cover. But then we were able to separate the motor from the transmission by undoing all the transmission bolts, and then we just lifted it out. It was relatively simple. We only had to drain the coolant and the oil. And now basically we are going to be comparing the third gen motor with the fourth gen motor. So far it looks like the heads do have slightly different bolts and stuff, so we're going to do our best to make it work and tell you guys everything that we have to modify.
So you can see on the left we have the bare Gen 3 block. Everything's been taken off of it, and the stuff we have that we need to use is now on the Gen 4 block. So from the Gen 3 Prius, we used the exhaust manifold, the flywheel assembly, the O2 sensor, this little mount thing, the fuel rail, and the injectors. We are also using the Gen 3 intake because we're working with the Gen 3 wiring harness. And from the Gen 4 engine, we are using the EGR as well as the water pump.
So to make the Gen 4 EGR work with the Gen 3 intake manifold and Gen 3 exhaust manifold, a couple things had to happen. So basically this almost bolted right up. I had to just tweak this pipe from the intake to EGR just a little bit, but those two bolts bolt right up. Then for the EGR to the block, it got spaced out around 1/4 of an inch. You can see the three washers. There's three washers behind both studs and the bolt for the EGR, which pushed it out that little bit. And then also you have to modify the exhaust pipe from the manifold to the EGR assembly, just kind of working with the flange here, heat it up red hot, and then kind of bend it till you can get the two bolts to fit in. And so aside from that, we're going to have to do a bit of custom coolant lines, which we'll do in the engine bay, but for now, that is how we're doing it. And lastly, before we drop the motor back in, we also used the mount from the motor that came out of the car because it matches the chassis, the 2012 Prius V. So we're going to go ahead and put the motor in like this, and then we'll update you guys with anything else we have to modify. Okay everyone, so we put the 4th Gen 2ZR FXE into the 2012 Prius V, and we reconnected everything and started it up, and it's been a few days now so that I know everything is working. We've driven it probably a couple 100 kilometers, and the only issues we've had was a small coolant leak, which I'll get to in a second. So now that I know that the swap works good, I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys what stuff is different inside the engine bay. So there's really not too much that had to be changed. The major stuff had to do with the coolant lines at the rear of the engine bay. They're all connected the same in terms of the firewall to the EGR and the coolant pipe. The only difference is that the 2012 Prius V and potentially other 3rd gen 2ZR motors, this will be really hard to show you, but it's right there coming off of a coolant pipe going to the catalytic converter is an extra coolant nipple that you don't need anymore. So we just blocked it off with a hose with a bolt in the end of it, but a rubber cap would work a lot better. There it is right there. So that's the coolant pipe on the chassis that you have to block off because you do not need it. And then just connect the coolant lines the same way they came off to the EGR and the motor from the firewall. The fuel line hooks up exactly like stock because we used the 3rd gen fuel rail. The EGR was already done, as you saw in the last clip. Just reconnect all your hybrid stuff the same. And then the wire harness, of course, is from a 3rd gen plugged into a 4th gen motor. So unfortunately, it doesn't really clip onto anything on the top of the motor. Instead, we just kind of zip tied it to every bracket we could find. The only kind of difference is the grounding points. So here is what we did. These are the 2 grounding points for the harness, the wiring harness. So we did one to the head and one to the engine mount over here. And then there's another grounding wire on the rear of the head that connects to the chassis. So those are the 3 grounding wires. Don't miss those, or else you're gonna have a slew of electrical problems. The intake is off of a 3rd gen and it works. The only thing is that you're missing, of course, the valve cover mounting bolts. So this one's kind of just floating there. We just zip tied it to a hose to keep it sturdy, and honestly it is fine. So yeah, you kind of have to get a little custom with your intake mounting. This is the PCV, positive crank ventilation hose. We just kind of custom made one that went to the 3rd gen intake to the 4th gen valve cover. Trying to think if there's anything else to show you guys, but I really don't think that's it. There's anything else, sorry. That's pretty much it. Most of the stuff you can do before bolting it in, like the EGR, which you saw in the last few clips. So it's running good now. We just threw an O2 sensor code because I think the O2 sensor is bad, but no other check engine lights. And the hardest part was probably re-bleeding the coolant because there's so many lines that have come disconnected. But now the 2012 Prius has a low kilometer 4th gen motor, which shouldn't have the same head gasket issues. So hopefully all you Prius owners liked this video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. And if you have any questions, I'll try my best to answer them. Thanks for watching.